Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
So Mexico's president has cancelled his visit, but Theresa May arrived a short time ago in the United States saying she was confident she could strike up a strong working relationship with Donald Trump. She'll be the first foreign leader to meet the new president, who's in Philadelphia tonight with senior Republicans. Our political editor, Gary Gibbon, was on Mrs. May's plane. First, though, to Washington and Kylie Morris. Kylie.
John, Donald Trump has just spoken in Philadelphia, expressing excitement at his meeting with the Prime Minister, saying Britain wants to talk trade, but as he has no Commerce Secretary, a dig at the Democrats who are delaying his cabinet appointments, he says he'll be dealing with it personally himself. He's dealing with quite a lot today, it must be said. Fallout from his comments on torture last night. What seems like, as you say, the breakdown of another important alliance, this time with Mexico over the wall, and high-level departures in the State Department, some of America's best and brightest diplomats among them. Flying on Air Force One for the first time, Donald Trump arrived in Philadelphia, the city of brotherly love, to make a special relationship even more special, according to the White House. Theresa May is the first foreign leader to meet the new president, the second just cancelled. President Peña Nieto of Mexico, angered by President Trump's insistence his country should pay for a new border wall, won't be coming next week. If President Trump needs advice on how to handle the snub, he might need to start making calls, since the entire senior management team in the State Department, which handles America's foreign affairs, seems in upheaval. It's not immediately clear whether those who've left resigned or were pushed. The official response, this is part of a normal transition. As career diplomats, they were sworn to carry out the new policies of the United States overseas, including the wall, and defending comments like those from Donald Trump last night that now he's president, he still thinks torture is an effective option.
Does it work? Does torture work? And the answer was yes. I want to do everything within the bounds of what you're allowed to do legally. But do I feel it works? Absolutely, I feel it works.
Those views not only put pressure on diplomats and allies like Britain, who rely heavily on intelligence gathered by America, but also on President Trump's own party. At their Republican retreat in Philadelphia, senior members were sticking with the law.
Well, I think the director of the CIA has made it clear he's going to follow the law, and I believe virtually all of my members are comfortable with the state of the law on that issue now.
And torture is illegal, and torture is not legal. And we agree with it not being legal.
The Republican Party is caught in the slipstream of the bold agenda of a new president. 4 working days, and President Trump has already signed executive orders on Obamacare, freezing federal jobs, the wall, and other moves to stem illegal immigration.
Since taking office, I have taken major contractual steps to restore the rule of law and to return power to everyday Americans. And even though it's only a few days, we've done it in record numbers.
It is the speed with which the president has moved on his campaign promises that is delighting his supporters, but shaking his civil service.
I think if we had just inaugurated a President Jeb Bush, a President Marco Rubio, you wouldn't see these officials feel that they have to leave.
Matthew Miller is a former spokesman for the Department of Justice. He says some movement among senior officials is normal, but this is not.
Former colleagues of mine at the Justice Department that I've talked to are facing this same tough choice now, and I think you'll see some of them will leave immediately, and some of them will probably stay and try to fight from the inside, and then eventually just give up within a year or 2 years when they decide it's too much.
In the past hour, the U.S. Border Patrol chief, on the front line of President Trump's war on illegal immigration, has left his position.
Well, now let's go back to Gary Gibbon in Philadelphia. Gary, you were on the plane there with Mrs. May. She's arrived amid a great controversy about torture and much else. What cooked?
Yes, as if things weren't uncomfortable enough and nerve-wracking enough for Theresa May coming over here, the daughter of a home county's vicar coming to see this billionaire property developer. Donald Trump added to the discomfort and the nerves, really, by doing an interview overnight in which he said that he supported torture. Inevitably, we asked Theresa May on the plane, was there any change in British policy? Would she be bringing it up with him when she meets Donald Trump tomorrow? She said no change in British policy, and she noted that he hadn't actually changed American policy. He just, my words not hers, blurted something out. And I think that's quite interesting in the sense that the government is constantly looking around to see, trying to divine what it is that Donald Trump is genuinely going to do and what it is that he's just going to talk about and what it is that he can be stopped from doing. And it's very interesting that round the corner from here, there she is talking to Republican congressmen in an hour or so's time and congresswomen, because she wants them perhaps to be a check and balance in the great spirit of the American Constitution on a president who won't always be doing things that she wants. One area in particular there where her audience round the corner, you see a few protesters around me now, this is Donald Trump's first visit from the Capitol, so they're not missing the opportunity to demonstrate against him. Quite a lot of the Republicans in there are in favour of free trade, and of course Donald Trump parades his protectionist loyalties quite openly.
Start tomorrow at the White House, but what's interesting is on the plane we gather that when she was asked what it is about Donald Trump that makes her think she can get on, she said opposites sometimes get on, or something like that. How will they get on?
That's right. It was slightly flirtatious delivery. She said, haven't you ever noticed sometimes opposites attract? And I think she's just trying to bluster her way through an awkward question, to be completely opposite with you. I can't see this really hitting it off as a personal relationship, but she wants it to be a really solid political relationship. I suspect she's going to start the meeting by handing over the formal invitation from Her Majesty to come over later in the year, perhaps this summer, and have all the trappings of a royal visit, a state visit laid on for him. But she's going to try and build a personal relationship with him as well. And I think she's going to be really careful about picking the battles that she can genuinely move him on a bit. I think she's going to try and get him to say something strong and supportive about NATO, but not necessarily picking some other battles in this very first short introductory meeting.
Gary Gibbon in Philadelphia. Chris.
So where now for that special relationship at a time of Trump's America First? With me now, Labour's Shadow Attorney General, Baroness Shami Chakrabarti, and the former Conservative Chancellor, Ken Clarke. Ken Clarke, how risky is it for Theresa May to be going off to be his best friend and the first person to meet him?
Oh, it's for quite an important coup to be the first person to go and all the rest of it, but I think she will be careful. I mean, it's very important, it is for any British government, that we have as good a relationship as we can have with the American president of the day, the American
regardless of who he is.
Well, it's got to vary. What we mustn't do is revert to being Washington's poodle, which is how half the world regards us anyway, and what she mustn't do is repeat the mistakes of the Blair-George W. Bush relationship when Blair just got involved in disastrous decisions like invading Iraq, and our security people did get compromised by turning a blind eye to, and certainly sometimes getting involved with, the things that American intelligence were then doing, which I don't think they want to do now, the waterboarding, the illegal rendition, when quite obviously things were done which should not have been done. We've got to be a firm ally, but actually, knowing Theresa as I do, I have no doubt that personally she's quite sound, for example, on torture. That no way is Donald Trump going to browbeat her into
will she
allowing
bring it
our
up?
Intelligence services.
Will it be one of these
so.
things with the Chinese where
so.
you just don't mention it? Or will she say, no, these are the things we disagree on?
Well, we'll never know, but she's got to bring some things up. I mean, it just happens to be the thing of the day. It's not the most important thing. Our intelligence services have learnt their lesson. They do now comply with the law. If they're not, they are fooling everybody rather well. What I hope she also brings up is NATO and the fact that Vladimir Putin is a geopolitical enemy to people in Europe, including the British, and we do want some reassurances that whilst you try and get a better relationship with Russia going again, we are safe in being protected against, helped to protect ourselves against any more adventurism by Putin. They're more important things than the chat on the plane about torture and Donald Trump's latest off-the-cuff outrageous remark about torture.
Well, I mean, funnily enough, of all the things Jeremy Corbyn disagrees with Donald Trump on, he probably agrees with him on NATO, doesn't he?
No, I don't think that's the case. I agree with much of what Ken has said, but I'm a bit less sanguine because what he's calling a coup, is an enormous responsibility. If you're going to go and be the first, and by the way, he's not just, it isn't just an off-the-cuff remark about torture. He's been talking about waterboarding and worse all through his presidential campaign.
So what should she do?
I think she's decided to go, call it a coup, call it a risk, call it a responsibility. She has to speak up, and she has to speak up publicly. She can be polite, she can be dignified, she can be a stateswoman, but she has to be a critical friend.
What would that achieve? I mean, Jeremy Corbyn tweeted a list of things she should, she should raise the NHS, she should raise torture, she should raise all these things that she disagrees with him on. What would that achieve?
You can have a joke if you like, Krishnan.
No, I'm asking you what it would achieve. I'm not joking. He's the one who's laughing at you.
Well, I don't think Donald Trump would know what the NHS was, would he? I think it was Obamacare.
If you are the first premier of another country to visit this man who is an out racist, an out misogynist, who has insulted half the human race, you have an enormous responsibility to speak out. She has, as a woman, I'm not playing party politics with this. She can't just rely on the fact that she's a woman to think that that's a statement enough in itself. She has to speak out. She has to speak to him privately, but also has to come out and say that there was robust discussion about torture, about the rights of women in the US, in the UK, and around the world. And if she doesn't, us women in particular, but I think all sorts of other people and minority groups will feel very let down.
What would happen if she did that?
No, I think...
Apart from winning some support...
I think this is a symbolic visit, really. They won't cover all that much in this visit. And they've got to cover the key things. And you've got to bear in mind, she's Prime Minister. She has said, during the American election campaign, some of the things about Trump's views on women that Charmy is saying. I have not the slightest doubt what Theresa May's opinions are on some of Trump's attitudes towards women. They're the same as Charmy's. But as Prime Minister...
Then why go and suck up to it? That's the point, isn't it? If you disagree with him on all these things.
It is key to our security and our political stability that we have a good working relationship with America. And what she's got to do is establish that despite the obvious gulfs in political views between her and Donald Trump, there couldn't be two more different sort of politicians, that we are ready to be an ally, we're a supportive ally. We think we're mutually dependent on each other for quite a lot of intelligence and security, and we're prepared to get engaged in foreign policy things.
But that's why the torture point is so important.
She's got to concentrate on NATO, Putin and the Middle East. She hasn't time to start
arguing
Ken, you're
right about security, and you're right about this very close intelligence relationship. And you were right in what you said before about what happened when we, as the British, got mixed up in torture. If she does not speak out unequivocally and make it clear that she's made those remarks to Mr. Trump in person as well, there will be a real concern that we're going to go down that path again.
If he turns out to be a total disaster and the scourge of the free world, she's going to regret this visit, isn't she?
No,
only if she doesn't speak out. Now, I hope springs eternal with me. She's made this trip. I want to hear the nature of the speech at the retreat, and we want to see the optics of the press conference. And it won't work. It won't work unless she demonstrates that, yes, she's a friend of the United States, but she's a critical friend of Donald Trump, and there is a lot to criticise at the moment.
Now, while you're both with us, I have to raise the question of the Article 50 bill that is going through the House of Commons. Labour has faced its first resignation. Tulip Siddiq has quit, saying she would rather oppose a hard Brexit from the backbenches. I mean, the irony here is that we have Ken Clarke, who said he's against hard Brexit, and he's going to vote against the government. Labour opposes hard Brexit, but he's going to vote with the government.
Well,
the reason
let's get Shami Chakrabarty's response.
I have colleagues who are democratically elected, unlike me, who have really, really painful anguish, because on the one hand, they know that the British people have voted one way, but they've got very different circumstances in their constituencies, and that has got to be understood. Labour is the most populist political party in the UK. We're the biggest political party in the UK. The UK has been split over this issue, so guess what? We represent people in both camps. And that is, some people call it a bind, I call it a responsibility.
But it's your position that makes no sense. That's the point,
I don't agree, because we are Democrats. This referendum, which I was against the Brexit. I campaigned to remain, but I'm a Democrat and I have to respect this decision. What we want to do now is to move on from whether you trigger Article 50 and begin negotiations and move on to what kind of Britain we're going to be.
Well, Europe's always caused the great neurosis in British politics because it splits both parties. And our conventional tribal party politics, which is breaking down anyway because the public are losing interest in it, it doesn't match the event. My position's so simple. I mean, it's very straightforward. For 50 years, I still believe that the country is made more powerful politically, better off economically by being in the European Union. People would fall about laughing if I cast a vote in favour of Britain leaving the European Union. I think referendums are a dreadful way of deciding such a thing, a huge broad-brush question. I thought the campaign was pathetic on both sides. Anybody wanted to find out more about the European Union, the campaign found out nothing. So, but I've several times tried to persuade the public to vote for Conservative governments, and in their wisdom, more of the public have voted Labour, and I've found myself in Parliament facing a Labour government. Now, nobody ever has told me that my duty is to obey the commands of the public. I must now support Labour's policies on nationalisation. I'm an enemy of the people if I start using my judgment as to what's in the national interest and the interest of future generations in casting a vote. Now, the people who signed up to referendums are all over the place, and I would recommend to Jeremy not to make a very serious three-line whip. He never took any notice of three-line whips. Don't have a three-line whip. Let all the Labour members wrestle with the dilemma that individually each of them face.
Ken Clarke, Baroness Shami Chakrabarti, thank you very much. Well, back now to tonight's main news, and Donald Trump is still in Philadelphia, where Republicans have been huddled at their group retreat. Ironically, it's one of the sanctuary cities which the president has targeted for offering safe havens to undocumented immigrants. Our international editor, Lindsay Hilson, is there.
President Trump says he's going to return power to the people and the states, but not the cities, because they're the centre of opposition to him. Places like here, Philadelphia, where he is today, it's a bastion of women's rights, gay rights, immigrant rights. And that is going to be one of the major fights of this administration. Yesterday, he signed executive orders against sanctuary cities like Philadelphia, where the police routinely refuse to cooperate with federal authorities to deport undocumented migrants.
At the Philadelphia Immigrant Rights Project, Juntos, a new generation of activists is learning how their new president is signing executive orders that may change their lives.
He just grabs the pen and signs them, and it becomes a temporary law.
They're reading the New York Times.
Mr. Trump, whose campaign rallies featured chants of "Build a Wall," has instead described many undocumented immigrants as criminals who must be found and forcibly removed from the United States.
But it's not all sad. I see your faces. How are you feeling right now?
Shocked.
Scared.
Frustrated.
Frustrated?
It's personal. 15-year-old Cindy is here legally, but not her mother and father, who have no papers.
What about your parents, the fact that they're undocumented? Are you concerned or worried about that now?
I try not to be worried, but if it were to happen, I don't know what I would do. I'm lost. Like, sometimes I really want to help my parents and like do something, but it's really complicated, like how this system works. And I never like really put too much thought into what if they were actually deported.
Philadelphia's mayor, arriving for the auto show, says he'll fight such deportations, despite President Trump's order to withdraw federal funding from sanctuary cities like this that refuse to cooperate routinely with federal agencies deporting illegal migrants.
They're undocumented people. They're not illegal immigrants. They're undocumented human beings who have decided to live in Philadelphia, and we have a responsibility to keep them safe. Philadelphia has the lowest crime rate that it's had since 1979. So all of this assertion that somehow sanctuary cities are dangerous places are simply untrue.
But your policy is different from President Trump's policy. How are you going to resist?
There are methods that we have our congressional folks, we have the courts, we have lots of protections. This is not a dictatorship. This is a democracy.
Philadelphia, the city of brotherly love, has one of America's fastest growing immigrant populations. 9% of the city's people arrived recently from Asia, Africa, Europe, and large numbers from Latin America. Geraldo and Teresa make a reasonable living from their taco stall. They came from Mexico nearly 30 years ago, but only got their papers last year. They fear President Trump.
Y él se le olvidó que también viene de raíces inmigrantes. Entonces,
he's forgotten that he also has immigrant roots. Maybe he doesn't know what an immigrant suffers. We know from our own experience because our son was deported and we've had to struggle to survive to make a living. As we would say, he can't imagine what it's like to walk in our shoes.
Como decimos, no se ponen en nuestros zapatos.
A town hall meeting on education for immigrant children attracts far larger numbers than expected. Councillors are listening to the fears of young people like Cindy.
We ask you to defend us today by, instead of putting money into criminalizing us, that you instead invest in supporting us and our parents. Thank you.
Wonderful, thank you.
It's tough, isn't it?
Very.
You scared?
For me, no, but for my parents, I am scared for them, and I guess I am scared for like 11 million other undocumented people who are in America.
Undocumented migrants will be targeted in the time of Trump, and every family asks, will it be us?
Joining us from Washington now is Marianne Mendoza, a Trump supporter who applauds his hard line on immigration. But do you applaud his hard line on sanctuaries, Marianne?
Absolutely. And just listening to your previous report with the young girl who was afraid her parents came here years ago, I have no sympathy for them. They've been here 20, 25, 30 years. They know that they needed to get in line to become legal in this country. They have choices. My son was killed from somebody who came from their country. My son was a police officer in Mesa, Arizona. He was hit head on and killed on his way home from work one night by a person from their country. And my son no longer has any choices. I no longer have any choices of my life with my son. They have choices to take their children, go back to Mexico, and come back here legally. This is a strain on our country economically. And these sob stories from these people, they all know that they've come here illegally. Every country in this world has immigration laws, and because we now have a president who has chosen to stand up for Americans and enforce our immigration laws is not a reason for the backlash that is coming against President Trump. President Trump cares about Americans, and that's what needs to happen in this country.
But you're happy that their legal children would be allowed to stay?
If they're legal, they can stay. Their parents have to make the choice. Are they going to take them back home with them or not? And like I said, they have choices. They can still have phone calls with their children and email and make visits and see them. I don't have those choices anymore.
Can I ask you then, do you feel at this moment that your vote for Donald Trump and your support for him has already been vindicated?
Absolutely. My son's death has been vindicated, because he didn't deserve to die the way that he did. He was protecting people in this country. He went to a job every day and protected his community and got rid of drug dealers that were coming across the border from Mexico and kept his beat, the beat that he was assigned to, he kept those people safe from these types of criminals.
But let me ask you something else, because
my son had to die.
There's something else that Mr. Trump has said. He's going to build his wall, and he's going to have Mexico pay for it. But tonight, we've obviously got the situation in which the president of Mexico has cancelled his visit and says there are no circumstances whatever, under which they will pay for it.
Do you know how much money goes back over the border every year from Mexicans here in the United States? Billions of dollars in remittance payments to their families. We spend billions of dollars a year supporting these illegals from other countries, whether it be food stamps, free health care, welfare, education, any of the programs that we pay for these people is billions of dollars. Stop doing that and stop providing this free taxpayer benefits to these illegals who are in our country, and the wall will be paid for. It's a no-brainer. Mr. Trump is an intelligent man. And all of these news outlets that want to make out like he's an idiot and we don't know, he doesn't need to meet with the president of Mexico to get this figured out. He doesn't need to meet with the president of Mexico to make our country safe again.
But you will be perfectly happy. You will be perfectly happy. You will be perfectly happy if in the end you find yourself having to pay for the wall. It's that important.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'd write a check for $500 today to get that wall built.
Marianne Mendoza, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Well, now we're joined from Berkeley in California by Professor Robert Reich, who served as a cabinet secretary under President Clinton. Robert Reich, thank you so much for joining us. I'm wondering really what you make of the first 5 days of President Trump's appearance. He is a change maker, let's put it to you like that.
Yes, that's a charitable way of putting it. He is a change maker. Let's put it this way. A different way of putting it is that for those of us who feared the Trump presidency, all our fears have proven themselves to be quite well-founded, in the sense that Donald Trump is a xenophobe. He has put in place and is planning to put in place more and more policies that isolate the United States from the rest of the world. Last weekend, he was very clear with Europe that he doesn't care about the common market. He also said that, once again, he reiterated his position that he believes NATO is obsolete. He almost equated Angela Merkel with Vladimir Putin, which was astounding. Astounding to Europeans, obviously, but also astounding to those of us in the United States who follow foreign policy. But to use your word astounding, the truth is that over 60 million Americans found their circumstances such that they wanted this man and they wanted the change he promised. Yes, that's true. And I think that is testament to not only how bad their circumstances are relative to what they expected. That is, for the last 30 years, most Americans have not seen any increase in their wages or their standard of living adjusted for inflation. And the Democrats also have failed, and they've failed for every time the Democrats have had power, to do very much about this trajectory. The big business, big moneyed interests, both in the Democratic Party and the Republican Party, have basically kept any change from happening of a sort that would have prevented this authoritarian demagogue from taking over. So we have nobody to blame but ourselves.
In all honesty, Robert Reich, surely what one can say is that your party lost its way. It became the party of the elite. You used to represent the working man and woman, but it came to be known as basically, the rich person's party. And that seems to be the division in the country. The people who've made money out of the banking crisis and the rest of it are voting for the Democrats, and the people who didn't are saying, oi, it's time we had a change.
They're saying, oi, they're saying we want a change. I think you've got it right, except there's a nuance that you've left out, which I think is still quite important. Barack Obama did try to do many things for the working class, the middle class, the lower middle class. He couldn't get done because Republicans in Congress would not let him get them done. And that is largely because the patrons of most Republicans in Congress also have a great deal of money. And if anything, the Democrats are more and have been pushing harder with regard to Medicare, Medicaid, the Obamacare, that is the Affordable Care Act, all kinds of things that would help average working people than have Republicans.
And are you confident that somebody can pick up those reins and rebuild the party and get back into power next time?
I'm not at all, and I worry about that a great deal. I think the Democrats are in terrible shape. Democrats, still, many of them I talk with, are in denial about just the fact that the Democratic Party is on life support.
On that terribly gloomy note, I'm afraid we're going to have to end it, but thank you very much indeed for joining us, Professor Reich.
Thanks very much.
And one PS to the Trump matters. The star of the Iranian film The Salesman, nominated for an Oscar, has said she will not be attending the Academy Awards ceremony in Los Angeles next month because of Donald Trump's plan to block entry to the United States for immigrants from a range of Muslim nations. Tarana Andarusa said the move was racist.
Now, he's ignoring Beijing's one China rule. He's torn up a trans-Pacific trade deal and railed against countries that destroy American jobs. Donald Trump's foreign policy is nothing if not unpredictable. So in this new world of shifting alliances, what's the view from Beijing? Kieran Jenkins is there.
Well, while the eyes of the world are on Washington and the early days of President Trump, every bit as important is what happens here in China. This relationship between the US and China that Barack Obama called the most important relationship on the planet is now very much up in the air. At this stage, we can't even say for sure if the future of that relationship will be cordial. Here in China, they are very conscious of the fact that during the campaign, in campaign mode, Donald Trump portrayed China as public enemy number 2 almost after ISIS, blaming China for stealing American jobs, for breaking international law, for unfair trading. He proposed huge tariffs on Chinese imports. He proposed reviewing the One China policy, potentially recognizing Taiwanese sovereignty. Now, an advisor to the Chinese government has told us that that would be non-negotiable. But it's Chinese New Year here, and in that New Year there is an expectation, a realization that there will have to be some form of new relationship between China and the United States. They are hoping for the best, but they're preparing for the worst.
Like the grey Beijing air, what happens next between the US and China is not at all clear. The election of President Trump may change the fortunes of Chinese citizens in a way almost no other external event could.
For many decades, we've enriched foreign industry at the expense of American industry.
At his inauguration, Trump didn't need to name-check China. His words echoed attack lines lobbed at the Chinese throughout his campaign.
We must protect our borders from the ravages of other countries, making our products, stealing our companies, and destroying our jobs.
But in this country where real estate commercials share ad space with Communist Party slogans, Trump's inauguration was not broadcast live. America buys far more from China than it sells to them. Trump wants to redress that balance. He's threatened to slap 45% tariffs on Chinese products, a move that could provoke a trade war. The official Chinese government response has been muted, but state media has let rip. Zhao writes for the Global Times tablet.
Kieran.
His paper has called Trump arrogant, childish, and warned of revenge.
If we must say who is the winner, I think maybe China, in my opinion. Yeah. The message the China's government want to send to President Trump is that China will not be afraid of trade war.
All right, we're going to sign 3 memorandums.
But Trump's presidency may also bring opportunities. He's already withdrawn from a trade bloc conceived in part to curb Chinese influence in Asia. The Transatlantic Trade Partnership,
Everyone knows what that means, right?
didn't include China. It may gain most from it falling apart. In Davos last week, the unlikely sight of the Chinese president defending globalization. President Xi Jinping said protectionism was like locking yourself in a dark room.
Well, the message coming very clearly out of Beijing is that this is not a battle that China is either prepared or willing to lose. And they know they have some leverage, whether it's as a bridge to North Korea, absolutely vital to America's security interests, or the staggering amount of American debt that China holds. Only Japan is owed more by America than China is. And as Donald Trump surely knows, picking a fight with your banker is really a good idea.
And this banker has a navy. Here, a recent show of strength in the South China Sea. China has built military installations on artificial islands here, ruled illegal by an international tribunal. Trump's pick for Secretary of State said China should be barred from accessing them.
Hello.
Hi.
Much rests on how China would react. This man advises the Chinese state on foreign relations. The gist? It could get very messy.
Do you think it's tantamount to a declaration of war?
Yes, if they turn their words into actions by action. For example, if China's ships want to islands and they take action to stop, that means the declaration of war.
There may also, he says, be friction with the US over trade too.
We prepare two categories of measures. One category of measures is we want to make a compromise, and the other preparation is we have to prepare for war if Trump launched the trade war.
Ni hao. Hey, ni hao. This man's trade war is normally with the police, moving him on from his yogurt stand. But like many others here, he expects his president to come out on top.
No country can look away when another country is threatening its sovereignty. China cannot look away when others bully us.
The Chinese government this week again expressed its wish for cooperation. And yet, if it comes to a standoff, neither side will want to be seen to back down. Kieran Jenkins, Channel 4 News in Beijing.
Theresa May is in the US tonight, charming senior Republicans with a speech in Philadelphia and stressing the historic ties between the UK and the US. Her messages on leadership, free trade and shared values went down well with her audience. Tomorrow, the diplomacy might get just a bit trickier. In the Commons before she left for Philadelphia, politicians of all stripes were queuing up to offer her advice. But she has to walk a tightrope. If she'd listened to the majority of them, she would have a list of grievances in her briefcase, everything from human rights to climate change to misogyny. In fact, the new president has offered the hope that we might have a closer relationship than ever over the last 8 years. After all, he wants a new trade deal and he's a big fan of Brexit. Our diplomatic editor, Mark Urban, is here. Mark, what was the tenor of her speech?
Well, it was reaching out for what a lot of people in Downing Street see as a great big political opportunity for the UK. However problematic Mr. Trump's image may be in this country, some of his remarks strongly in favour of the UK and, of course, at the expense of the EU and indeed Germany, which President Obama had praised so highly in his last weeks in office, all seemed to them to constitute an opportunity. But let's see what she had to say.
President Trump's victory, achieved in defiance of all the pundits and the polls, and rooted not in the corridors of Washington, but in the hopes and aspirations of working men and women across this land. Your party's victory in both the Congress and the Senate, where you swept all before you, secured with great effort and achieved with an important message of national renewal. And because of this, because of what you have done together, because of that great victory you have won, America can be stronger, greater and more confident in the years ahead.
Well, fascinatingly there, not too many mentions of President Trump, but addressing the congressmen and women and senators directly a few times. Lots of mentions of NATO too. Now, of course, it is a congressional do, this conclave, but I think one can see her acknowledging the complexity of the way power is dispensed in Washington and reaching out direct to those people and making her pitch to them as well. Of course, President Trump tomorrow.
Yes, she's meeting Donald Trump tomorrow, but there is a leader who will not be next in line now.
Well, it was meant to happen early next week that President Peña Nieto of Mexico was supposed to come, and this was going to be the beginning of, you know, the tough talking about trade, about the wall, all these other things. Well, people had been asking themselves, what's going to happen when Trump sends one of these tweets? And that's exactly what happened today. He said they might as well not come if they're not prepared to pay for the wall. And a couple of hours later, in Mexico City, it was announced, OK then, the meeting's off. Well, that wrong-footed the president for a while. He then appeared on live television saying, well, I'm going to slap a 20% tariff on Mexican imports then. And of course, then people in around him in the White House started to row back a bit, because it's not that simple. Of course, you'd have to put legal and all sorts of other arrangements in place. I think we begin to see the first signs of someone who has the impulse to act like a Putin or an Erdogan, actually dealing there with the complexities of a constitutional democracy. Still, for all that, Mrs. May is in there tomorrow. And, you know, there is an aspect in which I think people understand that President Obama wasn't that great for Britain in some ways. And this is a new opportunity to define, as she said, redefine the special relationship.
Until last week, there was a president widely esteemed in Britain who didn't exactly return the love. He removed Winston Churchill's bust from the Oval Office, couldn't forget the treatment his grandfather received in Kenya, and plainly considered Germany a more important ally than Britain.
As I reflect back over the last 8 years, I could not ask for a steadier or more reliable partner on the world stage.
Now, of course, there's a president who alarms or appalls a great many Britons, but who, in marked contrast to Obama, is seeing Theresa May ahead of all other foreign leaders, and it seems couldn't be more supportive of Brexit.
It's not a bad start. He doesn't seem to like the European Union. He seems to like Brexit. He seems to be encouraging other people to follow our example in leaving the European Union. Now, a lot of people in the United Kingdom would consider these things to be terrible negatives, but it does give Theresa May some sort of basis or springboard.
It was Palmerston, and who better for this age in which we seem to be returning to 19th century style jostling nationalisms. He said, Britain has no eternal allies and no eternal enemies, only eternal interests. So, if it's in Britain's vital interest to cosy up to Donald Trump, why not? The question is, of course, whether it's also in the interests of an America First president.
This is a protectionist president, so any idea that he's going to open up to our market and, you know, he's the big player in this, we stand to lose our environmental protections, our food standards, our food assurances, and this will be a Trojan horse for Trump.
Britain can, of course, offer Trump something back in some areas. If the Donald accuses many NATO allies of being freeloaders, that's not so different to long-held Downing Street views.
Instead of planning expensive new headquarters or dreaming of a European army, what Europe needs to do now is to spend more on its own defence. And that is the best possible approach to the Trump presidency.
But on so many questions, from policy towards Israel to torture, Putin, or withdrawal of funding from the UN, Britain is on a quite different page. How to break the news to Trump gently.
This is not going to be easy for her. She's got to steer between not behaving like a British poodle to the American president, but at the same time creating an atmosphere in which, as she said herself, that you can invest new meaning in the special relationship.
These days, and we saw this during the last visit here by the Chinese president, diplomacy as demanded by many on Twitter or even from the floor of the House of Commons would involve lecturing a foreign leader on why their values can't be more like ours. Well, unsurprisingly, foreign leaders are no keener on that than any British leader would be.
Tonight, Theresa May arrived in America, telling reporters frankly that any resumption of CIA enhanced interrogation would damage intelligence sharing. With suggestions the two leaders may give a joint news conference tomorrow, the Prime Minister's balancing act couldn't be trickier. At least, though, she can start on the basis that since his election, Donald Trump has saved some of his kindest words for Britain and has moved that famous bust of Churchill back into the Oval Office.
Mark Urban. Well, in a moment we'll speak to the former Labour leader Ed Miliband, but first the Daily Telegraph columnist Tim Stanley is with us. Good evening to you.
Hello.
So what should Theresa May do tomorrow? Should she go in all guns blazing or should she be very judicious?
I think what she's going to do is what she's going to be doing anyway, which is saying one thing publicly and another thing privately. Publicly, she started off on a strong foot by saying, I'm with you not just for for strategic reasons, but also there's a philosophical connection between us. So she really rolled out the lavish praise. Privately, I wouldn't be surprised if she was going to say to him, first of all, drop the language about torture, because aside from Britain believing it to be immoral and illegal and wrong, it also is a propaganda coup for the enemy. And secondly, I suspect she's going to push very hard on America continuing to be the leading force within NATO. So I suspect that what we see and hear publicly is not necessarily what the tone will be behind closed doors.
And indeed, in that speech tonight, she mentioned NATO 8 times. She mentioned
Yes.
Donald Trump once, she mentioned NATO 8 times. So the signals are pretty strong. But as we know, if Donald Trump doesn't like that, it's perfectly capable of turning around and saying something that's actually less than diplomatic.
We don't know that yet. We're starting to test Trump as a president. We're starting to work out if what he says publicly is what he really gets on with and does. Torture is a good example of that. I think we in the press have got to be, we've got to learn to distinguish between what he says when he's in his reality TV mode, when he's talking to someone casually, and what he actually does. So when it comes to torture, new head of the CIA says he's against it, new Secretary of State of Defense says he's against it, head of the Republicans in Congress say they're against it. It's unlikely to actually happen. So we just have to hope that what he says isn't necessarily what happens.
And of course, if Theresa May listened to everybody, she'd go with, as I said, a huge list of grievances. But presumably, is it your view then that trumping all else, that wasn't actually meant to be a plan, beating all else is this idea that it would be good for Britain to have a good trade deal? Does that matter and kick everything else out the water?
No, I think it's the thing, again, which she leads on. That's what she wants. But she's also got to be thinking about what he wants. And he needs us as much as we need him.
Really?
I think he does. He needs to be able to show, first of all, that he can get a deal. He's always selling himself as a great businessman. Well, no one really wants to talk to him right now, except the British. They're the most enthusiastic, except for perhaps the Israelis. So here's a chance for him to strike a very good deal. Also, that association with Britain carries with it credibility when it comes to global strategy. It's a chance for him to reassert that actually he is going to lead NATO. This is his chance to reassure the world. And that's what Britain often provides in the special relationship.
And did you get that sense, in a funny way, although the inauguration is all razzmatazz, you were there, did you get that sense that there was an undertow of this? Is there something you decided that has appealed, that has happened since the inauguration? You sense a different mood?
I don't. I think rhetorically he is sticking with appeasing his base. He takes the view of, I only just won, and I won by just about getting enough states to back me. And I'd rather cling on to those people so that in 4 years I scrape through again than that I try to reach out either to the American public or global leadership.
Well, just finally, it's clearly America first.
Yes.
But is it necessarily Britain second?
No, I think there is a correlation between what Trump wants to achieve and what we want to achieve when it comes to combating Islamist terrorism, when it comes to trade, and most importantly, this new philosophy. 18 months ago, 6 months ago or so, Britain was really a pariah in the world. We'd cut ourselves off from Europe, and we had a president who just didn't really like us and said we'd gone to the back of the queue. Overnight, suddenly, we're best mates with the leader of the free world, and that's fantastic.
Tim Stanley, thank you very much. I'm joined now by Ed Miliband. Isn't it pretty great that the British Prime Minister is first in line with a meeting of the leader of the leader of the free world?
Not with Donald Trump. Look, I think Tim is underestimating what has actually happened this week since he became president. Banning refugees, endorsing torture, defunding the UN, taking on climate change. I mean, where do you even start? It's starting a trade war with Mexico today, lifting sanctions on Russia on Saturday, apparently. This is not normal times.
No, but it's not.
And her speech, and let me just say this, Kirsty, her speech was a perfectly decent speech if it had been normal times. But to align yourself so closely with his project, which is what she did, that, I think, was the mistake.
Right. If Ed Miliband was Prime Minister, one, would you have gone?
Yes.
And two, speaking to senior Republicans, I mean, she very
I
clearly...
probably wouldn't have been speaking to senior Republicans.
Well,
Look,
yeah,
I think...
but what I mean is, what would your line have been if it's about...
Well, let me put it this way. I prefer Merkel to May in the way this has been handled. Think of what Angela Merkel did the day after the US presidential election. She said, yes, a partnership with America is important, but on the basis of certain norms and values, of human rights, of commitments to equality, of things that are important. And you know why this matters?
But you don't take Tim Stanley's point that this is all, mood music for a particular audience.
I tell you what, words and signals matter. They matter to the impact on Trump, who only respects strength, and they matter to our reputation around the world. I must say, if I can just take issue with one thing in the film and what Tim said, President Obama I mean, what is it about this sudden denigration of President Obama? I used to watch as leader of the opposition. You know what I used to think? David Cameron has got a fantastically good relationship with President Obama. I was mildly jealous of the relationship that he had with President Obama. Suddenly, President Obama has been cast as his enemy of Britain because...
Hang on. He said, you know, let's be quite clear. During the debate on the EU referendum, Barack Obama said quite clearly there'd be no special treatment. It would be at the back of the queue when it came to a trade deal.
He took a position on Brexit, and you can think that was a bad thing or a good thing. Personally, he was saying we need a strong Europe, and Britain will make Europe stronger. But I think the notion that we had an enemy in the White House and now we have a friend in the White House, and just on this trade deal point, this is really important. People may not realise this. The tariffs that we have with the United States, they're incredibly low already. The thing this is really what worries me about this idea of a trade deal is it goes to what they call non-tariff barriers. What does that mean? Regulation. Regulation around healthcare, the environment, employee rights, and they have less regulation than us. So I think this trade deal is a really dangerous Trojan horse for which we seem to be locking ourselves in America in Donald Trump's boot, and I think that is not what I would be doing.
Well, we actually haven't locked ourselves in Donald Trump, but in fact, Theresa May, it was very, I think, quite careful, and I think that's right what Mark said, to differentiate in our conversation tonight. But when it comes to going and lecturing other people, we all have memories. We all have memories of Gordon Brown going to China and expecting we're going to hear great things about liberty and freedom in China. Was that behind closed doors? Because it certainly wasn't in public.
I don't remember his Chinese speech. I thought you were going to mention Tony Blair and George Bush, and that ended pretty badly, didn't it? I mean, there's a lesson there about that. Our alliance with America should be based on our values and the values that we hold in common, not simply on the idea that we want to be at the front of some notional queue.
But the idea that you ideologically agree with every single leader around the world is, of course, nonsense.
Of course.
So therefore you have to make your priorities. And I wonder what would you have done? Would you go into a list of priorities saying, if you are going to ban Muslims for certain countries, we won't work together. If you're going to consider torture, we won't work together. If you're a climate change denier, we're not going to work together. Really?
I think it's tone, and this is about self-interest. But be very clear about this. It is in our self-interest that we are strong in defending the climate change treaty. It is in our self-interest to defend a two-state solution for Israel and the Palestinian people, which Donald Trump seems to want to overturn. And I'm afraid there were grace notes in Theresa May's speech tonight. She knew she had to mention some of those things, but that wasn't the main thrust of her speech.
You know, Britain voted for Brexit. Donald Trump supports Brexit. You know, OK, Theresa May says we have to well, there's one point of agreement.
Yeah, but I mean, he wants Nigel Farage to be the ambassador. I mean, you know, goodness me. Look, I think a lot hinges on this trade deal. If you think this trade deal is a get-out-of-jail card for any economic problems we might get for Brexit, then maybe you think it's worth us locking ourselves in the boot. I am very, very sceptical. And by the way, let's not forget, he's a protectionist. Protectionists are very sceptical of trade deals, and he's about to impose tariffs on Mexico.
Let me go take you back to the question of torture, even the conversation about torture, which, of course, he then deferred and said it would be dependent on the CIA chief and so forth. Do you think, if you're a Prime Minister, would you, at this moment, be allowing British agents to share intelligence with American agents if there was any chance of torture?
No, we can't be complicit in torture. Absolutely not. And look, I think, to be fair, that sounds like the briefing that is coming from Downing Street. But again, we need strong words and signals, because our reputation around the world matters. Other foreign leaders are looking at what's unfolding tonight.